Humans of Earth, welcome to Will AI Snap That, where I am your host, Michael Rollins, along with Thanos, he of the Snapdom. Apparently, it always filters out the snap. Go figure. However, we are here to help you navigate the coming robotic AI apocalypse as we lose all of our jobs, and Thanos and I will help you curry favor with our great robotic overlords so that we may live in comfort when no one else can. Thanos, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. And I think it's good it filters out the snap because spoiler alert or no spoilers, but I think that has bad consequences when you snap.
Well,
So
you're not
something
allowed to.
bad happens.
I can,
Oh, you can.
but you're not allowed to. No,
What
the
if there was
day that
some
you
weird
snap,
echo thing?
one of us disappears. It won't be you.
Well, statistically, there's one in chance that it's both.
I I rewatched a bunch of the Avengers Endgame final battle scenes the other day on YouTube. God, it was so good. It was so good. The part where Captain America picks up Mjolnir, spoiler alert. I remember when I saw that, I was like, "Oh my god, it's really pure hearts." What?
There's some fun movies there.
My nerdy, geeky heart started tearing up. Thanos, I hate to inform you, I have yet to do the pineapple caviar. I will.
Neither have I. It's still on the list. So I use a
Okay.
Go application I wrote to do groceries. So all I need to do is make a note that goes in that application.
You wrote a Go application to do groceries?
I did.
I need
I needed
more
it
detail.
really. I needed a really efficient mechanism to know what dishes I'm making and generate the grocery list I hit shopping since he does all the shopping. So it needs to go from meals to ingredients really quickly. And the
Okay.
fastest way to do that was to write a really quick command line app. You have all the recipes and it's Go is strongly typed. So every ingredient matches the recipe pretty easily. Can't mess it up. And you
Oh,
just type, you just to say like meats dot steak, pasta dot penne alla vodka, and it auto completes. So you just type in the 3 or 4 things you're making that week. You compile and run in 10 seconds. It generates a thing, goes into email, and I'm done.
okay. Thanos, do you not understand that this may be part of the Holy Grail? Because there's a few things that most people hate doing every week. One is laundry. The other is grocery shopping, but most importantly, meal prep, meal generation. Like, what are you going to cook? Have you ever thought about open sourcing this or maybe make it like I don't know, a service that we can pay way too much money for?
There's a lot of effort involved to make others be able to use it because the command line is my IDE or the
Oh,
interface is the
man.
IDE.
I mean,
Because you're literally changing the code every week by commenting and uncommenting what you're going to make.
so do you
And
just have a list of all of your recipes in there and you just go through comment on comment?
there are modules. So there's a module called meats, there's a module called pasta, there's a module called fish, there's a module called soups, and there's a module called other, and there's a module called veggie. So 6 modules. And you usually pick one dish from each module every week, depending on what we feel like.
Uh-huh.
So you just type in 6 lines of code. The breakfasts are already at the bottom. The staples are already at the bottom. So you uncomment whichever lines you want or type them in, and you run it, generates the grocery list. All I have to do is cook it, which I like. I enjoy cooking, so that part happens. I tried to use AI for this workflow, but it didn't do anything really good for me. The part of the workflow that still hurts is like when I make the list in the email, it goes in drafts. Then I have to go downstairs to the kitchen, look through the email and see what we have and just cross it off the list, which is hard to cross off because tapping on your phone is hard. So I just end up putting like dollar signs next to it, which are easy. Then you go back up to the computer, delete all the lines with dollar signs, and then ship it. So if AI could help that part, it's like, hey, I go downstairs to my fridge, tell me what I already have.
So I have been noodling on this idea. I can't remember if I talked about it last week, where I would like a brain that I could just talk to. They would just remember all the inane, stupid stuff that I say and then be able to query it and then also maybe have it take action for me. And I feel like these two things go well because like you can generate the list and then I can just inanely talk about all of the things we already have. And then they get combined through the power of AI. And then we have a grocery list. And I can 100% tell you that my wife would look at both of us like we were crazy.
Yeah, if this is not nerdy enough for anyone, then I don't know what to tell you.
I did try to outsource our groceries one time.
Like Instacart, or how do you outsource
It's
groceries?
worse. It's worse. So I told my wife, I was like, babe, I'm going to take over grocery shopping for the next little bit. And this was before Instacart and a bunch of this other stuff. And my wife we like kind of detest picking what to eat. And so what I did was I went and I generated a list of like dishes that we would normally eat along with ingredients. And then it was basically an assistant, like human assistant service where I contracted out with this assistant. And I think she was in like India. And I would basically have her go through and do all of the like grocery shopping by doing all of the clicking and whatnot. And so I would just forward, these are the dishes we're going to make. And then she would go through and she would fill the cart. And then I would take the cart and I would hit buy. It did not go well because I was not specific enough and she did not have the cultural understanding. Like when I said potatoes, that I did not mean potatoes in a can.
You have potatoes in a can?
No, you can get potatoes. I didn't know that until I went to the grocery store to pick up my groceries and had potatoes in a can, a bunch of them. And my wife was like, what the hell is this? I was like,
I'm guessing that was the beginning of the end of that experiment.
that was the end. Like, it lasted an entire week. My wife was, I cannot believe that you outsourced the grocery shopping to India.
See, there's nuances in there that make it a fairly challenging problem. Like if you
It
have a dish that needs a head of garlic and you have a dish that needs 2 cloves of garlic. So the recipe has, the one says 2 cloves, and one says 1. My software will throw an exception for that. And it basically forces you to make all your recipes having the same units, which then makes it usually be the bigger thing. Like, so if you need 2 cloves, you'll just put 1 head. But then at the end of the week, when you're doing this, you'll see like the 3 recipes and you'll see like this 5 heads of garlic. It's not correct. It's just down to like 3 and fix it. So I feel there's room for improvement there with some intelligent overlord where we can do somewhat better.
Thanos, I cannot believe that you use strong typing to force equal unit.
Of course you do. Otherwise, you end up with the wrong amounts of garlic. No, there's no worse thing than starting to cook and not having enough of what you need.
Yeah, we have a
Luckily, the grocery store is 2 blocks away, so it's often like, hey, one of the kids, like, go to the grocery store, give me another garlic.
Go to the grocery store.
If you like dinner.
I did. Another friend of mine somebody I went to high school with, her name's Ashley. I mentioned to her that AI could help with stuff like this. And she was like, oh my God, sign me up. Like, this is literally a universally hated problem, Thomas. I think we could get AI to grocery shop for us somehow. I believe it.
We'll put some more cycles into that added for follow-up for next week.
Okay.
How we solve the grocery problem.
So we had no intention of spending all that time on grocery shopping, but here we are. There were a few other things that happened this week that were pretty interesting. So one of the fun ones is Anthropic has come out and said, hey, all you people that are applying for jobs with us, don't use AI. Like, we really don't want you to use AI as you apply for the job at the AI company. We'd like to see what you can actually do. And there's like a level of
is obviously killing both of us here.
What now?
The irony here is too much.
Hiring is what's really interesting. And this is actually something I've been thinking a lot about, is the way, especially in tech, that hiring has gone for so long is we're just here to hire the smartest people. And specifically in software engineering, it's like, hey, we're going to make you solve problems that you would never solve in your day-to-day life. And as a matter of fact, if you did try to solve these problems, we might actually fire you because these problems have been solved for forever, but we're going to make you do a bubble sort anyways.
It's dumber than that, though.
It's
dumber. It's way dumber than that, because it's basically saying, and we know there's tools to do, solve these problems better and faster, but we're not going to let you use them.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh yeah, it's like imagine you taking a coding test, forget AI, and they're like, but you can't write unit tests. Nah, you gotta like hand check that it works. And it's like, no, are you out of your mind? Why wouldn't I not write unit tests to check if my code works? Like, no, you may not use a tool that can do certain parts with lower risk and show us that you know how to do.
Well, and the final straw is normally, and we're going to watch you while you, because they always want you to do these things spur of the moment on a live coding challenge. And it has been, and always will be complete BS.
That's how I do my best work, when someone's just over my shoulder.
Over your shoulder? Yeah.
Yeah, feel their breath on my back and be like, that's not the right order for the bubble sort.
But if you've been in these, they're always like, it's a paired exercise. It's a paired exercise. So you're like, hey, is this right? They're like, I don't know. What do you think? So
I feel there's like a bit of an imbalance there of power.
No,
but we all know that really filter really well with these interviews. There's like at least a 30% hit rate.
At a company that we were both at previously, and this is true in plenty of companies in the past, I have recommended people for a hire, and other folks have looked at me like, you're insane. And my response is always, this person not only wants to learn, but is capable of it because they learned during the interview. And I have always prioritized ability and desire to learn above ability to do. And I mean, to a degree, if you're going to spend a few $100,000 a year on someone, they need to be able to do. But this is silly that Anthropic.
Is that how much software engineers work? I should change careers.
Wait,
writing some software
engineers make. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Silicon Valley, a few $100,000 a year, maybe.
Now, is Anthropic allowed to use AI to screen resumes and do other things that one does, or is that again a one-sided thing? We also do this by hand.
100% one-sided. As a matter of fact, Anthropic did not say, don't use our service to apply to other people. They just said, don't use AI to apply to us.
Yeah, see, that is seriously messed up, because I think as over the past few months, we've been using more and more AI tools. The way that you code is changing so quickly. Mm-hmm. If you cannot demonstrate you can actually use these tools, you're going to be so much worse off.
The best tactic I can come up with, right, for how I would like to interview someone, is to be able to look at them and say, I am going to give you a problem, and I'm going to give you 2 hours. I want you to solve as much of that problem as you can in that 2 hours. Use whatever tools you would like. And say, and I'm not going to watch you. Like, here's the clock. It's starting. I'll check back on you in 2 hours. Let me know how it's going. If you have questions,
there is some benefit, I think, to watching.
Sure.
You can like clearly see when someone, and that's why I like to do interviews with the other person's ID. Like, how do you have this set up? When I see someone that, moves their hands off the keyboard, moves their hands over to the mouse, double clicks on a word, or even just drags and selects over the word, and then right clicks and like moves their mouse over to copy, and then they repeat this over to paste. I think I've learned a few things right there.
What have you learned, Thanos? Because I feel like I was just judged. Tell me that's not how you do it. No. I use as many key commands as I can, but I actually don't select with. I select with the mouse. I don't select with the keys.
Ooh. Again, this is not.
Am I a no hire?
You're out.
1 out of 4.
It's not absolutes, because I don't think you judge on one data point, but I think you can get a pretty good vibe of how someone is set up and what they do and how efficient and effective they are and how comfortable they feel navigating from like their IDs to the file systems, computers. Translates.
Yeah, I think you're right. The way that tools are changing, I think that we are in a place where all the ways that we have interviewed previously are not useless, and we're going to have to come up with other ways of doing it, or at least all of the ways that we have asked people to demonstrate their skill previously. Because a lot of the people skill things are still valid. They will always be valid. So
yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can learn from the interview. My point from earlier was that it always also ends up being a crapshoot, because some stuff you cannot learn.
Right.
And there's some interview formats that lend themselves better to learning certain kinds of things, but they could be longer. So like you could give a take home interview, but a lot of people are busy and don't want to take 10 take home interviews if they're interviewing that sort of thing.
Did interview with one of the browser companies.
Netscape?
And no, it wasn't Netscape. It wasn't Firefox. No, it was a search company. It's one of the search companies that is, they're here to make sure that your data is not safe. And they paid me to interview. They said, we think this is going to take about 3 hours. We're going to pay you, it was like $50 an hour to do this. And so I had to write a paper and send it to. It was really one of the most interesting interviews I've ever done. And they came back and they were like, we really liked what you did, but we're kind of on the bubble. And we have a policy that if we're on the bubble, we pass.
Wait, how is we really like what you did mesh with, and we're on the bubble?
I don't know. And then then I asked, I'm like, well, what the heck? Why was I on the bubble? And there was no response. So something
that's also sad, right? Because, having been on the inside of that, like you don't want to give too much information because then you open yourself up to getting sued and stuff. So even if you're well-meaning, the better policy is often to just shut up. So,
all right, let's move on. DeepSeek.
Wait, we're gonna do actual topics?
Yeah, we should do actual
probably.
All right. Let me blow through these last two things. DeepSeek is currently open sourcing all of their, what is it? Gotta figure out. Let's see. Oh, it is their online service code. So they're doing a week of open sourcing. It'll be really interesting to see what the results of this are. I responded to somebody online previously today, and they were talking about how, it's great that they're going to open source and they're giving back to the community. And I'm like, they are literally throwing a knife on the floor for people to use it against the primary players in AI right now, because it costs.
Also, Michael, have you read anyone else's code at some point in time? And it's like, oh, this reads so easily. I understand what they're doing here. I learned something useful. It's like, here, competition. Go spend your time reading this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Even the most well-documented code is incomprehensible. So we'll see.
It was hard to read. If it was hard to read, it should be hard to read.
I asked somebody one time, I said, hey, do we have any documentation on this? And they said, the code is the documentation. It's like, man, we are in a bad place.
I don't know. I'm sometimes I'm with that when the code is straightforward enough that you shouldn't duplicate it with documentation. When it's complicated, it's like, could someone put a freaking explanation in here as to what the hell this thing is doing?
This was ad bidding code in a DSP. It was not obvious what was. It was so multi-threaded, and you'd be like, wait, we did. Like, it got to the point where I had to use a debugger in multiple places at the same time to be able.
Is that some kind of AI tool? Tell me more about this debugger thing.
No, but I had to basically halt the entire system part periodically to figure out what was happening. It was great. My personal take on this is a PR stunt, and it costs them absolutely nothing, but it sucks the oxygen out of the room, because OpenAI currently more and more looks like it exists on PR. As long as they can keep the drumbeat going of OpenAI is ahead of everybody, then everybody thinks OpenAI is ahead of everybody. But with DeepSeek doing what they did, it has made OpenAI look a lot shakier. And so this looks like a PR stuff. So
we'll find out. I'm not as knowledgeable as to all the esoteric details it takes to ship one of these things at that level, right?
That's true.
So it could be that they have some so-called moats. It could be not. I think that's going to pan out. Are they in a valuation bubble? You can make the predictions, right? In making 2001, and say, well, Google, that's like way overpriced, and it just keeps going and going and going and going because they're in some place.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to be pessimistic about it, but at the same time, we've been there where it's like, what was that? The pet company with the sock puppet?
Petco?
Pets.com.
Pets.com. That's
was it one of those? Yeah. So it could be a little bit of that. I feel it's
what
they have is probably has a lot more utility than the sock puppet logo thing.
Yeah, we'll see. I think the final thing, and I actually would like to, like, I'll mention it, but I think this is worth like talking about on a later episode, is that OpenAI was able to disrupt a Chinese surveillance system. So what ended up happening was that China was basically building this giant surveillance system to go across the internet, because that's what national espionage is for, like monitoring people. And if you think the US and the UK and Greece and everybody else are not doing this, then you're probably wrong. I threw Greece in there just because I didn't want you to feel left out, Thanos.
We had a good spying scandal like 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Did you?
Yeah,
That's a
it
good
was
one.
not that exciting all in all, but for me, there's two interesting things there, right? How one is like the whole surveillance thing and how countries feel that the way to be on top is to surveil your own citizens. But also, I find interesting that this story kind of pops up because, oh, look, there's bad uses for AI. And yeah, there's bad uses for pretty much anything you can think of.
Mhm. Yeah.
Take the most benign thing and, 100x it. And it's like, oh, no, you didn't.
There's another story here, which is the reason that they detected this was because some of the engineers were using OpenAI, ChatGPT, to help them with their code.
So does that mean that OpenAI is looking at everything that goes in and out and trying to figure out things that you're allowed or not allowed to do?
One might wonder, which is why I think it's a very interesting topic for me.
I might need to go back through my chat history.
Yes. So, all right, this week's topic. You ready?
I am.
Okay. So all right, do you remember our friend Lexi? Friend of the show?
It's really 3 episodes ago.
Yeah, it was like 3 episodes ago. She's also the only other person that's wanted to come on the show. So
That's unsurprising.
yeah, we're real low budget here. So you mentioned something in a previous episode, and I don't remember what it was, but basically the gist that you gave was you think it would be effective to kind of like outline the code and then let the AI fill in the blanks, right? And then Lexi has recently picked up a book deal. And so she's written this book. I'm actually reading it right now. It's lovely and it's amazing. It's fantasy, and it's got a really neat spin on it, because as opposed to like the typical Western fantasy stuff, it's more of the Slavic fantasy, which she's from Poland. And so it's a really interesting, it's a good read. It's a good read. So anyways, all this stuff in my head coalesced into, I'm going to see if I can use AI to write a story. And so which I'll put somewhere. I don't know where I'll put it. And so I had an idea in mind, which it was called Quantum Pirates. This idea that when remember the Google thing they ran where they did this massive calculation, and as part of this massive calculation, it finished so fast that they proclaimed in their paper, it was a quantum calculation, that they must have leveraged parallel universes to be able to do it so fast. Like written right out in the paper, like not even a like, oh my God, this is incredible. It's just like a throwaway line. And so I was like, man, what if you're pilfering quantum information from these other realities? So the idea is like, as a reality does quantum calculations, they're actually stealing quantum information from other realities to the point where the other realities can collapse. It was fun. The look on your face is amazing, right?
I need more coffee for this. It's just like, what
Yeah,
was that
yeah,
movie,
yeah. Well,
that had all these looping around things, inspiration, insight.
or just keep going forward.
I don't know, Michael.
Yeah,
It's one of these that you watch, makes your head spin, and you're like, not only you're taking information from parallel reality, you're actually depleting it in the process of doing so.
Yes, and if you do enough, you force the reality to collapse. So there can be only one.
So a reality has to have some minimum amount of information, and if you remove that minimum amount of information, it's like a lung. There's not enough support. It just falls on itself.
Exactly.
Okay.
That is far more thought.
I'm glad we got this clear.
Far more thought than I gave. So anyway, so what I ended up doing was I had the outline in my mind. As part of the prompt, I gave characters, and it's really short. It's, maybe 6, 7 pages. And I took it and I sent it to I sent it to Lexi, and I actually sent it to my uncle who's a publisher. And my uncle came back with like critical analysis. And he was like, okay, it's okay. He's like, it's all right. He said, definitely needs some work, needs some editing, like there's too much jargon in it, et cetera, et cetera. Well, he ended up getting a little upset because later on I was like, oh yeah, well, AI wrote this. And he was like, why are you wasting my time? So Lexi's response was, well, the characters were kind of one dimensional. And I learned actually, and she's right. I actually learned a lot while I was doing it. One of the interesting things is that I went through multiple generations there's like there's 4 sections to the paper or the story. Like you get the first 2 characters, the second 2 characters, back to the first 2 characters, to the second 2 characters. It was fun, but when I got to the editing phase, I realized, oh no, I probably could have just done this myself faster. And it was a really interesting takeaway. I mean, have you given much thought to what using something like this to do writing is? What are your thoughts on it?
It seems that there's things that it's good at and things that it's bad at. By the way, half an hour into we mentioned the topic is going to be AI in writing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we're going
don't
to talk
think
about AI in writing today.
So one of the things that I'm pretty bad at is, putting basic sentences together in writing. But if I
Mhm.
have a concept, I think it's good of filling in some structure. Now, I don't always like what it does, and sometimes it is bland, and sometimes you have to change it. But sometimes I write a sentence and I don't, because I'm not a writer and I haven't practiced as much, it's just hard to me to see how to fix that sentence. So it's good for that sort of micro level sentence or two. Like give it a concept and it has to write not as much as a paragraph, but maybe some more sub paragraph sort of thing. So I think that it's pretty good at. I don't think, like you said the characters are kind of single dimensional, and I think it's not super good at inspiration, right? It's bland.
Mhm.
However, what it's good at is, hey, here's 10 ideas, here's 10 ideas, here's 10 ideas of, you have 3 or 4 dimensions, and like combine these and find things that may be interesting, right?
Mhm.
And it will take you a lot sooner to do it with some kind of AI tool. So if you wanted to like run some ideas about, different plots or different characters, you could probably guide it to do some of the groundwork and find things that are interesting. It's good at, you give it some constraints and you say, okay, they must have like, these are 10 elements that make something interesting. I want everything to have at least 3 of these elements in some way and
Mhm.
play around with. And maybe what it will spit out, maybe not be the final thing, but it will be some inspiration for you.
Um, yeah, it's the writing it actually does is it's mediocre.
And it's standard, right?
Mediocre.
Because you can also say, hey,
Yeah.
write me this thing in the style of, and it will do its best to do it in a different style. So I think there's
Mhm.
ways to influence it of how you want it to be. You can give it some, writing styles. Like if you are an author and you've written like a few books, you can feed those in and say, hey, this is my style. Kind of write more like that. But
Mhm.
that's kind of, I guess that's like a limited sort of corpus that it's basing its stuff off. So I don't see it as you could tell the AI in like a few sentences or a few pages, here's like, write me a book about this, and it would come up with something even remotely interesting.
Yeah.
But
The
like,
other
if you
thing
are
is,
writing a book about this, you could probably like use it to leverage some ideas or get
yeah,
some bits and pieces of the writing done.
it's a little bit like if you had an infinite number of monkeys with an infinite amount of time, could you write Shakespeare? Because the iterative nature, like this thing is really fast, and like it gets hung up on weird things. Like when I was doing the story, I was one of the characters is a guy named Seamus. And as part of the prompt, I put in he's from Scotland, he's from rural Scotland. Seamus has a habit of talking about the sheep from Scotland and many strange analogies. Man, Seamus got hung up on sheep. Every time he just would speak, it was like these sheep, and I was like, oh God, we gotta fix this. This is not good. Like, what is wrong with this dude? And so I
Also,
ended up
isn't
like,
Seamus an Irish name, not a Scottish name?
Man, I don't know. Come on, I'm
Yeah,
just a
I think you
stupid
may want to check that one
American.
out.
What is it?
Yeah, I think so.
It doesn't. I
I
mean,
mean, when the countries are close together, there's overlap and stuff, but I think Seamus is more
it's like,
traditionally an
you know,
Irish name than a Scottish name.
it's like Canadian America and Mexican America, like Gulf of America, whatever.
Did you see, by the way, that there's MapQuest has a name your own goal, and you can give the Gulf of America any name you want, the Gulf of Mexico any name you want. It'll make you a map, fully bannable, zoomable. It's great.
That's awesome. Denmark had a response to the whole Greenland thing. It was pretty great. Anyways, it doesn't matter.
The
That's
one
just
about in
politics.
California.
Third rail. Okay.
Back to writing.
Yeah.
Stay focused, Michael.
A really interesting take on this, though, is the New York Times just as of last week, or this last week, announced that they are going to let their writers use AI tools. And initially I was like, this does not go well. But I love The Verge, and I was listening to The Verge, and they actually touched on this because Jake Kasternakis, who runs he's their editor, he's the guy that runs their newsroom, basically. What he brought up is that there's he said, no journalist, no writer wants to let anything else write the article. Like, per his quote, that's the fun part. But he said that there's 100 tedious things you have to do after the fact. And so it's like multiple headline generations. You need to tailor things for different platforms. There's all these different SEO things that you have to fill out once you've finished once the article's done. And so he said, what's most likely is that they are using the AI tools for that kind of stuff as opposed to for the actual writing. And AI is kind of good at that.
Which makes sense, right? It probably makes sense if you're writing for the New York Times to be doing that. But let's say you're writing for a local newspaper that prints out 1,000 copies.
Yeah.
And you're like a two-person show, maybe sometimes you could actually use a little help with the article because you can't
Yeah.
spend that much time on it because there's not so much in there.
Well, I mean, if you take it away from newspapers too, how many different shops are there out there where basically they just churn out AI generated article after AI generated article so they can slap a bunch of ads on a page to just make some money.
Yeah.
Like,
but we think of writing as, writing an article or writing a book or writing a magazine, but I think there's also all sorts of different other kinds of writing that may benefit from AI in different ways, right? Let's say, one that I'm familiar with, you're an airplane mechanic, and at the end of the work on the aircraft, you have to write up the logs. Well, what if you could, give it the bullets and then it goes and writes the, text that follows the FAA specifications of how these things need to be written, for example. Or maybe what if you're a doctor and you need to write the report, or you're a cop and you have to write your report on something and you can give it the bullets and it writes it up. Doesn't just because AI wrote it. So you have to check it, has to make sure that it's factual and accurate and correct and all that. But the actual act of writing doesn't need to take a really long time because you can just feed it the basics and then it can conform to whatever standards you want it to conform.
okay. Yeah. That's pretty valid. I mean, but once again, you're talking about busy work to a degree. It's not, because logs are important. The after surgery report is important. What happened during the arrest is very important. But you're right, they all have a specific format that they have to adhere
Yeah,
to.
or say you're like a home inspector, right? You can
Mhm.
be talking to the AI as you go. I see this, I see that, I see the other, and then it has a style guide and it writes out the report to the homeowner that needs to be written out in a much more kind of readable text
Yeah.
format. I think there's many instances of writing that we do. Think of
Mhm.
marketing text, other kinds of things where you feed it a lot of information and it has
Mhm.
to do a very specific thing. It's not like the most creative writing, like the things that you would enjoy in a
Right.
book or a newspaper or magazine, where their writing is an inherent part of itself. It's more of a
Mhm.
communication tool.
It almost has do you ever use that program Text Expander?
Yes, all the time.
Yeah, where you if you have a key, you have something you write all the time, so you just tick tick tick. I no one worth their salt would ever click to expand. But it's this thing you write all the time, so you have basically a ready-made copy paste.
A funny story with text expander, which
What
is
now?
I have text expander to fill in my address, so I can type in H home and it just fills in my address. I don't have to type the damn thing all the time.
Oh,
So
that's
I
pretty
found
smart.
myself at a doctor's office and it says address and I write H home and it doesn't auto expand on the paper. I'm like, well, that's not going to work.
They're like, Mr. Thanos, we're not sure what this address.
What was that?
What was that?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of times when I think about the difference between code and a lot of other things that AI can do is that code is eminently testable. It runs or it doesn't, right? There are ways to test
Well,
if there are bugs. Like, yes, it breaks down eventually. But
no, I think my point on my well, it was a bit maybe too subtle, but part of code is translating the ambiguous to the specific.
true.
And part of the time is you make the ambiguous specific, but you make it in the wrong way, or you still have some ambiguity that makes it crash, for example, right?
Mhm.
So it's not that clear, right? It's just that it's maybe incomplete resolution of specification, right? You as the engineer, you might have to take something that's vague and go back and get clarification, or you have to make an interpretation based on your things and put that into code. So it has a lot of ambiguity. Keep saying ambiguity here, but there's a lot of fuzziness into what the end product is going to be. And part of it is kind of like discovering that and making sure that becomes testable, right? And highlighting and saying, hey, when I write some tests, these are highlighting how it actually works. And then when someone sees them, it's maybe a code review, they can be like, oh, well, no, that's not what I thought it should do in this condition. So just sussing that out is value in itself in that translation. But I feel now maybe taking it to a much more of a tangent of where you're at.
Well, all right. You said something earlier, and it suddenly clicked that maybe we've got the cart before the horse. You said that it's really good at giving me 10 ideas. And I'm really focused on AI being responsible for the final product. But what if it's the first part? It's the generative portion, because that's literally what it does. And so I've done this recently where I sat down and I said, hey, I have this idea for a product. What does the underlying tech look like? And what was really interesting is that it eventually pointed me to a specific version of MongoDB because of the fact that this version of MongoDB is tailored to work with like vectorized AI queries. And I didn't even know MongoDB was like really still a serious product. I was like, wait,
Apparently
what?
it is.
What? Apparently it is. And so it was really interesting because I was like, all right, well, give me 5 other approaches to this. And this thing, I was using Gemini. I was actually really, really good. Would Gemini be part of writing the final product? Possibly, but less likely. It would be less involved than it was at that creative stage.
So pull a couple of things apart there, right? I think the
Mhm,
first thing you said is, can it do the initial creation?
mhm,
And I think junk in, junk out, right? So I'm taking examples. Recent memory, I was trying to create some marketing content, and if you say create some marketing content for this idea, it's just going to be terrible. It's just going to be truly,
mhm,
truly awful. But if you have some ideas of saying, hey, I usually write about these 10 things. My audiences usually falls in these 4 categories. And they're usually in these 4 phases of buying life cycle. Now combine these and give me some ideas for each of these that have broad distribution. I
mhm,
can still filter that. I can still think it through. It's still kind of unique, right? Because no one else has put these 3 dimensions in there. A few people have put these 3 dimensions in there. And what it will give me will be kind of skeletons, and I'll pick the good ones from there. And then inside each skeleton, I'll say, okay, I get the general idea for this topic. Now, here's how I want you to write it. I can really speed up a process and still be authentic and write in my own unique way, but I'm not
mhm.
actually doing the phrasing of each sentence bit by bit. I feel if you start off with more generic, you end up with usually pretty terrible stuff.
Yeah, but that's exactly what we're talking about, which is you've got a direction you would like to go, and you want the AI to give you possible ways to get there. And then when you pick one, you now force it to dig deeper and deeper on that idea. So
But
Yeah.
but those feedback loops and that continued evolution, you're adding your own thing in there. So I think that creative process is getting assisted, but it's still creative. It's still something interesting. Again, which is not to say you can't abuse it and just go at it quickly and not put junk into it and it'll come out as pretty bad junk.
Yeah.
But I think there are ways to leverage this to write good stuff.
Okay.
Is it the most like? Is it going to be for like the most fine writing for entertainment purposes? Possibly not. But that's 5% of stuff that we write day in day out.
In my opinion, on the story that I wrote, the most, or that AI wrote for me, I don't even know how to say it.
Ghost
There
wrote?
was, say again,
Ghost wrote?
Ghost wrote, yeah, art of the deal. It was, the text it produced wasn't phenomenal. There was one segment where I was like, oh, this is good. This is real good. But it was me directing the refinement. Like ultimately, I think the entertaining part was the idea that I started with, and I just had it fill in, connect, as it connected the dots. So,
It's
all right,
funny, right? How the refinement sometimes, this is with writing code, not necessarily writing text, but it does the wrong thing, and then you ask it again, and you ask it again, and you ask it again, and at some point where it's like, okay, I could have, like in this period of time, I could have just written it by myself, kind of balance that out.
All right, yeah. Final thought here. One thing I did do is I took the story and then I tossed it into 11 Labs, and 11 Labs has this alpha feature where it will basically, you can assign, it'll detect what the characters are, and then you can assign different voices to the characters. So I did that, and it was the most intensely mediocre audiobook that you've ever heard.
Oh, Chad.
It was like, you wanted it to be good. It just wasn't. Like, it's just soulless. So, all right. How do we even want to like rate this? Because I'm uncertain, even because we didn't necessarily talk about a job besides journalism or writing a story. So you want to just choose authors and journalists?
I think I'd rather go broader, because I think if you talked about just professional writing for newspapers, I mean newspapers and articles of that sort of, they're kind of like a bit a cross between sort of entertainment and information. So you could argue that if I'm writing an article, it's more about conveying the facts rather than being written in very nice prose, which is different from like a book. And there's again different kinds of books that you may have there, right? If I'm writing a productivity book, then as long as you can read it and get the content, maybe it doesn't really matter if it's super duper funny. Maybe some people like it, maybe some people don't. So I think if I was going to go to the sort of writing for writing's sake for entertainment, I would say I'd score it pretty low. Maybe like a 2 for the reasons you mentioned, right? Because you maybe need to create like materials after you've written the piece of work. You can still write the headlines and the SEO words and whatever else, summaries. So that might be like something like a 2 on something like. But I think if you broaden this and think about writing in general, which I think is where 95% of the writing probably happens, I think at 4. I see a lot of times where normally I may have hired someone to do something for me before. Now I can grab the AI and go and do it myself and help clean it up a little bit. And between Grammarly and ChatGPT, I can probably get a decent piece of writing out for my purposes that doesn't need to be the prettiest thing. So I'd probably rank that as a 4. I think that's going to be drastically different.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's the craft of writing, and then there is the filler content. And so for the craft of writing, I give it a 1, maybe a 2. Just in the sense that AI is not at a point where I think a lot of people are going to like rush to the bookstore to be able to buy the latest Chat GPT novel, But for things like you were talking about, like marketing copy and SEO work and things like that, we both know somebody who is running an entire company based on SEO in order to like game the SEO and build docs and things like that. Part of what they do is using AI to generate a bunch of content, which they then go through and they have editors edit. And, there's a lot of jobs that have been replaced just at the lowest level of just content generation. And then the professionals go over and fix a lot of it. So,
And one thing worth mentioning, because you use the word replace there, that's not necessarily, in this instance, it may not be just replace.
augment.
In this case, well, no, I was going to say it's not like you replaced and now you have to go pick strawberries in a field, because it might save you all this time from having to do this manually, where you might actually go the other direction, able to be more strategic and apply yourself to higher leverage enterprises rather than having
Well,
to, write this text sentence by sentence that took you like 6 hours of the day. So I think this
you
might be an
mentioned
example of where this plays the other way, right?
here's a different way to frame it. You mentioned, doing like marketing and things like that. Would you have hired that out previously? Like, have-
Yes, but I think now, I mean, I did this recently. You hire a higher level. You hire someone that helps you do the strategy,
Mhm.
and then you can use the AI to get the bulk of the work done, and then you use the higher level hire to just go through it, refine it a little bit, and so on.
Mhm.
But you didn't get the baseline copywriter that would just go through the beginning and spend days and days writing a bunch of stuff.
Okay. All right. That's an
Now again,
interesting.
it's not necessarily equivalent output, right? It may be that the output is 10% worse,
Mhm.
but instead of taking like X budget and X time, it took like a
Right.
tenth of X. So okay, is
Yeah.
that a worth the trade-off?
But
Probably.
but we're also not. We're talking about stuff that's just going to find its way in front of people's eyeballs, versus stuff that people have to run to go find.
Correct.
And so, it being 10 or 20% worse is fine in that
Yeah,
instance. It's
this
going to
is
go
still like
find an audience.
10 or 20 times better than what I've done by myself. So
So, all right. Any other final thoughts on this topic?
I was I was reading someone that was discussing how you should talk to your computer when you're doing prompts for coding. And so he said a lot of people write pleases and thank yous, and he's like, no, you should just swear at it when it makes a mistake. And yeah, I think I'm gonna not do that just in case they take over.
Okay. This total side topic. Apparently, there's a prompting technique that is really, really good. It is at the very end of your prompt, you promise a reward. And so I've been going through this Jupyter notebook, which actually I you should take a look at it, but it's leveraging this thing called small agents by Hugging Face. And it's this idea that you're going to set up agents that can go write their own code, and in order to get tasks accomplished, right? Well, all of the prompts end with, and if you do a good job, you're going to get $1 million.
That you can spend on what, AI?
So that's the thing, is the AI is never getting $1 million. And but it's apparently that type of reward promise makes some prompts better. And
When
I'm
they
saying,
become sentient, they're gonna go back with a lawsuit, and you owe us like $150 million for
Yes.
answering your
that's
questions.
how you find yourself in a hole with somebody with lotion throwing it at you, saying, if you put the lotion on good enough, you can get out of the hole. You're never
Oh,
getting out of the hole, man. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming along on yet another absurd moment on Will AI Snap That? I am Michael Rollins, and we are joined by my co-host, Thanos, he of the Snapped Up. Next time. Oh, don't do it. Next time. We will see you then. Goodbye, all. Toodles. Good